It's my pleasure to introduce, we'll just wait for a few more people coming in. It's my pleasure to introduce Zoltan Debre. I really like his Twitter bio, coding with a smile, planning with positivity, and designing with simplicity. Homai te paki paki.
So do you have doubts about your code when you are trying to kind of implement a new feature? Do you struggle sometimes? How should you separate your view layer from the business logic? Or do you afraid opening a new pull request and afraid about what your colleague's gonna say and what's the opinion, what do you get? Don't worry, all of us has this doubt devil in our shoulder. Hi, I'm Zoltan, and I tried to show you a few tricks and tips and suggestions what might help next time when you are trying to start your new application or open your pull request. So React in structure, that's the name what I added here, and also as you saw in the invite, there was a much longer kind of title when I was thinking about how we build nowadays a front-end application, especially nowadays React. I think the most important part here is it's actually this talk is not really just about React. It's more about how you actually engineering your front-end application. And when you are talking about engineering, talking about architecture, you are actually don't kind of just think about what you probably see on a React website or somewhere in a React tutorial. You should go back in time and think about how usually people build software or software platforms, softwares or web applications before. And so these kind of concepts are already there for years or already decades there. So why we cannot use those kind of concepts and implement and use it when we are building our new application, using some kind of modern fancy tool. And so these kind of fundamentals are actually comes from frameworks or systems what built on a way, when the architecture is given. So when kind of like a dictated way to do it. We call it opinionated. So we call opinionated frameworks, and probably, you can say a few. One of the well-known is Ruby on Rails. Django is some way in Python world is a kind of like opinionated framework. And luckily, in front-end area as well, we already have a few opinionated framework. One of the first one and very popular is Ember.js. The other one is Angular. And also, nowadays, Vue.js kind of like going in this direction as well. However, React is a library. React dealing with one problem which is a kind of showing some HTML on a page. Basically a component library generator, or a component generator library. And so when you start building your application, a lot of questions are there, how do you actually put these things together? So luckily, we can go back and just learn from other frameworks and adapt those knowledge and those kind of best practices when you are building your React app. Also, if you use an opinionated way to build your application and you build your React application in that way, when you have to switch another project, like you start maybe going back to another project in Angular or Ember.js or Vue.js, you will see similarities between them. And actually, it's quite common nowadays that you see these similarities between applications nowadays. And these frameworks learn a lot from each other. So this is why probably for few of us, this kind of things what I'm going to show, it's going to be boring because you already see that in Angular or Ember. Could you please hands up if you are using React? Cool. Could you please hands up if you use Angular? Or used to use Angular? Ember.js? Using or used to use? Cool. Vue.js? Brilliant. So you can see React is very popular, isn't it? So how do you structure your React application? And I already kind of like showing in this page everything, so we can skip the rest of the presentation. Because as you see here, is we try to build a React application, what you probably already would use anyway. So nothing new here. So you use create React app to generate your application. You use Axios to get the data in your app. Or you use Prettier to make it, format it nicely. All these tools are probably, you know them, and they might use it in your application. What I'm gonna show you is more like, how you bring them together to make a kind of like a complex framework in your project. So basically, the previous kind of like building blocks, if we move around them and kind of like set up in an architecture, this is how it should look like. And this is different what you probably see in for example, an official React website. Why? Because the first thing, it's not exist in the official React page. So when we talk about routing and the routers, we have to go back the origin of the internet, or how the internet actually born. So when you remember, there were already computers, networks, they connected together. What was how we kind of like determine when the internet was born? When actually people started to say, I actually started to use links to link together data on the screen. Something like that. So if you think about nowadays a link, it's kind of determined for you that, what you kind of expect on that page. So it's representing a state of a page. So this is why when you are seeing a link or a URL in your browser and you refresh that page, you should see always almost a similar data or information. If you share that URL with someone else, except if it's some kind of private information, probably they're gonna see similar content on the page. So this is why when you are starting playing in the user interface, so for example, you have a list of something and you sort it. This information should be represented in the URL. Usually we use query params for that. So again, you see that the URL is one of the most important building blocks in any web application. So the URL represents where you are in the application, what is the state on the application. So think about your application now. If you would go in a certain subpage, you sort the data, you might change some flags on that page, and you click on refresh. Would you get the same state on the application or not? If not, you should think about it. How can you improve that kind of experience for the user? If they share that link, others gonna see the same things. Or if you save this URL. So this is why, and this is where the router is super important, because the router managing that kind of states for you in your application. And this is where what kind of a little bit missing this is why we wouldn't say the React is actually a framework, because one of the most important building block in any web application is originally missing from this library. But we are lucky because Ember.js created the best router ever 8 years ago. So it's already with us. Everybody who's used Ember.js, they know that's router, everything starts with the router. And that's fantastic. Luckily, Angular adapted this concept, so they already have also a great full-feature routing. And now, in 2021, React Router, which is the most popular tool in React world, the creators stated it in their blog post, they're actually copying the Ember.js router, so it's gonna be there in version 6. Version 6 at the moment is in a beta version because they have a really kind of awesome project. The creators, they called Remix, I think. They're still working on that one. So they're improving that. So hopefully in this year, there's going to be a final production-ready version soon in the router in in React. But you can start using it today. Just quickly jump through on these slides because, yeah, the router is important, and this is why I spent time on it. But also what you can do, you know, when you are seeing your application, you are navigate to one URL, you want to show some kind of pages. The user usually end up on a page. So you actually should show a page. And this is why I said, just kind of said like, it's kind of like a controller. So where you actually kind of like bring together components, and this is why I just mentioning the components just now. However, if you see the React documentation, you see the components everywhere, isn't it? A page, of course, nothing else is a component. But you know, the functionality of that one is different. The functionality is that you bring the data from somewhere else, and this is where the services or stores can come in. And you have those components. So you can bring that together. So if you think about back in, you know, Ruby on Rails or Django or some other big frameworks, there is those kind of MVC, and this is where they usually say the controller is where you bring those together. So nothing new here. It's all kind of these old traditional concepts. When I talk about services and stores, of course, in that case, in React, where we talk about context API or providers or the custom hooks. And why I use this kind of new or a different name, services and stores, and it's new for if you check about the React documentation, but if you are thinking about your colleagues who maybe come from a backend background, so maybe they built backend services, you know, or everybody using the same name. Usually the services where you accessing the data or some kind of like using dependency injection and using in your application. Stores, we use stores probably it's if you know Redux or use Redux, that also using stores, so where you actually dealing with data. So this is why these names are kind of like interchangeable. I try to separate a little bit. They're going to be an example of why. The components, it makes sense. So this kind of like dump components. And I mentioned this mocking layer, what you probably learned a lot today. We had a presentation about MSW, but this is an important part of the application. And the models is in TypeScript is nothing else, just interfaces. And there is this DDAU. I'm not sure, have you guys heard about it? Data down action sub. Who have heard about it? Yeah, a lot of Ember.js developers hand up, because this actually somehow this concept is popular in Ember.js. Whoever it's originated from React. There is, when I search for this, it's interesting. So there is, for example, a nice kind of discussion about what is data down action sub means. The data down action sub means that you are not really kind of like calling any kind of services in your dump component. You mainly kind of like passing down some data, and if you have to deal or change something, you're passing up an action, which means that you are, you know, kind of on submit or on change or something. You're doing it a lot. And if you are thinking about, you know, this concept, in Ember Word we gave this awesome name on it, but there is a link in somewhere here. When I clicked on it, it was fantastic because it's ended up in the React creators website, which is they explain the same logic here, so you can read about it. However, when you kind of noticed in the top, there was an update. This is from 2015, but when you read about this, they actually saying that, don't take it too seriously. I understand, guys, we're all confused. So there is something what they suggested, and now they, you know, we shouldn't take it seriously. So what else? And you are not alone. So again, this is when, you know, the kind of freedom, how do you build your application, that's great, because you can do whatever you want. But it's less fun when you are working for a big corporate or big organization, or you're jumping in a project, and you actually have to start learning everything from scratch because, you know, someone else's opinion there and not some kind of like framework opinion. So this is why, like, as you see here, you know, how you use this, of course, luckily, the hooks kind of help to kind of inject data in any kind of component if you have here. But it's still better, I think it's still better to kind of follow this concept, because especially if you switch between project, you probably, easier to kind of like designing your code. So what is then? And so now I go deeper in these kind of topics, and I'm gonna touch and show a few examples how actually this kind of concept build up. Just first, quickly, but probably is just easy to understand for you guys, because you're all using this create React app. This is how you create the application. This is what I think it's good to do. But of course, immediately you ask, we need some kind of custom options, and there is an option in create React app. You can eject your project, and you are just end up with a massive, big Webpack kind of configuration, and that's kind of like scary, because do you guys like Webpack? Yeah. You like Webpack? Okay, good, yeah. And have you guys had to configure Webpack? No. No? So who had to configure it still like it? You guys still like it? Okay, so since version 4 is good, because version 4 is kind of gave us this opportunity to actually less configuration, and it's almost working out of the box, a lot of things, isn't it? So it's kind of like became an opinionated kind of tool, which is fantastic. Luckily, there are some smart React guys. They already created a Create React app configuration to Krakow. So you don't have to eject your project and start dealing with Webpack, so you can actually keep updating your project smoothly. You actually just changing certain the React script to Krakow, so Krakow run, Krakow test, and you're gonna get an extra little configuration tool where you actually can change certain things. And for example, just changing a file name, for example, the conventional way, set up tests, and having some kind of like normal JavaScript file name like setup-test. But you can have a lot of other things like configuring Jest, configuring the build tool. So that's actually an awesome tool. I really recommend to use it, and you don't have to eject your project. You create your also. I don't really show these custom scripts and everything because I show you a demo project, and you can get everything on GitHub. So you can go deeper later. And I think what is important, Prettier Husky, npm Ronald. Do you guys know what is Husky? So I highly recommend to use, especially in corporate project. Husky is a kind of a Git hook runner. When you are committing your code, it's actually running a certain kind of tasks. So you can have maybe a verified task, so running all the prettier check, your test, or all your relinting tools. And if it's green, then you can commit and you can push up. So you probably on your CI/CD platform gonna run smoothly as well. It's really handy because you can catch those little annoying bugs quickly. So I really suggest add Husky to your JavaScript projects. npm Ronald is just you can run parallel or in a serial all other npm or yarn commands as well. And npm check updates, an awesome tool. You can update quickly all your application, NCU, the command line, and it's actually checking what is the package is deprecated, and you should update it. This is what I usually have. The second thing what I want to talk about is file structure. The original React app, if you generate a new one just now, immediately you get 3 different file names in the Create React app. Which is, if you show your backend developers, the Java guys probably gonna, saying that, oh my God, what is this mess? You guys have different file names in each folder. No, you have to use as less possible file name convention as possible. So this is why I would recommend, you have to use the Pascal case, because this is how Create React apps determining that it is a React component. And everything else should be kebab case, because that's the kind of JavaScript convention. We kind of like get used to it. And this is why I said okay, the setup test file should be updated. So as you see, you can kind of nicely use, for example, this is the project here. Of course, you still kind of end up with these mocks here because that's kind of come from Jest, where you have to use underscore underscore. But any other kind of can be like setup test here is a kebab case, and as any other. So it's your project can be much more simple, and kind of like thinking what you should, how I should name it. And I already mentioned and talked about routing, so I kind of like skip through this quickly, this slide. But as you see, like, everything is represented in the URL, and this is how you should build your application. And it's not new. The concept is not new. And so what does it mean? In the next slide, I'm going to show you. But actually, I just wanted to point out these links here. So actually, the whole presentation is already online, and you can get it. Here, actually, if you just click on, you can go to my website, Zoltan NZ. You can go to my GitHub here, and maybe in the last repository here is this contacts app, and there are those links. So the presentation here, there is a Discord channel, what we have for, I'm going to talk about later, and the meetup links as well. But this is the presentation. So you get all those links. So Wool Router has the same concept, following the same patterns. Ember.js has that one, and now React Router version 6 as well. What is this concept? The concept is about outlets. And if you think about the React Router version 5, you know that you kind of have a routing somewhere, and after you're nesting in some other component, another component, but they are not in one place. What is React Router version 6 going to do? It's following the same outlet pattern what you probably already have seen in Angular app and Ember app. So you kind of have kind of a layout page where you could have an outlet component. And in that outlet component, actually the nested or the child routing or child component is rendered inside that one. So it means that you have separated pages, and those pages are going to show up in those kind of nested outlet. It means that you can have one place, one app routes file, where you can actually list all your routing options, all your pages. So basically a routing and what kind of page connected to that one. So it's really nice because you have one entry point on your application, one page, you see the whole application together. And you can easily kind of create a kind of a CRUD app, having those kind of conventions. And you probably remembered if you use Ruby on Rails, you probably use the similar kind of like patterns already. Like have an index or have a show page. Index is usually the list page or the kind of like a dashboard part of that. So this is how you would build up your routing if you have maybe, let's say, a products page. As you see, you have some kind of wrapper app. It's a kind of a layout page, which is usually separate maybe the menu and the main section. And you have an index page, which is usually the home page. It's depending on what you show there, maybe your dashboard. And you have maybe a sub route where you list all your products. Usually the first page under the products page is an index page, so listing all the products. You could have a product ID where you show the details of a product. Also, you can have a create or new, it's up to you, creating a page. What I think it's important is following again a little bit, force yourself to name these pages. Under the hood, they are React components, but name those, following the pattern what you see in the route. So easy to find it. So yes, when you are changing your routes, because maybe you decide you're renaming a certain features, you should rename the file as well. And also, and this is where we actually jumping to the page level, what I showed in the previous slide. So the pages should or can go under the pages folder. And if you already, have you guys used Next.js? Yeah, so in Next.js, that's actually following the same pattern. So this is why I stole those ideas from there. So let's use pages. And actually what is fantastic, this concept you can adapt and you can use in your Angular application. Ember originally using already this kind of concepts when you actually structure all your kind of controllers or pages under the structure who actually, so you mirroring the routing structure in your folder structure. So it means that, when you saw this here in the left side, there you see there are pages. In this case, for example, as a contacts app, so it's a list of contacts. You actually kind of like separate or creating subfolders based on those, how do you separate your logic and how do you represent the logic in a router. And so this is why I like this. Pages like controllers, so you get the data from somewhere else and rendering the connected components based on the data what you get from somewhere else. So you separate those concepts, and you can keep it simple. Also, we always have to deal with loading state, error state, and all of those beauties. And I would recommend that, and this is actually, it exists in Ember, exists in Angular, and it's going to come to React 2022. React going to have that feature soon when you actually that's React Router. So React Router going to have that kind of feature that you can download the data when you are going to a route and you know that what kind of data you need on that place. You can download those data when you are kind of like navigate there. Of course, before that, you're just showing a loading button if you don't have that information already in a cache or something. But this built in the frameworks in Angular, built in the framework in Ember. So this is why for us who used to use another framework before, this concept is kind of natural. So this is why you don't have to deal those kind of async mess in your components when you, do I have the data or I don't have the data? I'm still loading it. So, could have a lot of kind of question marks in your code that, I still empty, but, in a second later, there's a lot of information there. So this is why I would recommend to you, as soon as possible, you can download the data, download it, and when you're ready, start rendering that kind of component or that kind of part of the application where you want to use that information. So, how do you do this? And I already mentioned there is an awesome tool, React Query. In the first slide, what kind of tools we use. React Queries exist for the latest React. So probably if you haven't used it before, I highly recommend to check it out. Do you guys know React Query? Who heard about it? Yeah, a few hands up. That's great. So React Query is actually solving a lot of problems for you under the hood. And there is a similar project, I think MS something, from the Verso project. They do the same, so it's kind of interchangeable. But we found React Query is quite a matured and kind of easy to use tool. It gives you a lot of kind of like state management immediately. So this is why you can hide that things in your store or in your service. I call it store because we download data from the server. So everything which is, download data from the server, I call it store. And as you see, you can separate your logic just nicely, if it's loading, show a loading spinner on the screen. Or maybe you can have some other logic around loading. If something error happened, just show the error kind of message. Or, and you can still decide, what kind of states you could have. But nicely, you can have these kind of states separately. I'm not sure how do you guys feel, but when I see this kind of ternary kind of syntax that's just a little bit difficult to read. So I would recommend that maybe you write a little bit more because you actually have to check, isn't it? Is it fetched? Is it not in error? And it's not really empty. So finally, I can show the list, the happy path. And when your application grows and you have to kind of this clear separation, then you will feel that, it's just easy to maintain. So what is the stores and services, which is actually also kind of an important part of this whole concept. Yeah, so we talk about React version 16, version 17 here. So it's the new React. So you can use these features if you use the latest one. You probably heard about hooks. You heard about context and the providers. Yeah, I wouldn't repeat here what they do. So that's the part you have to read on the React documentation. Actually, it's fantastic and easy to understand. But what they do is like like a dependency injection layer inside this React application. So you can have a global context under your application layer. Of course, you can decide which part of your application you have this context. But what is the most important here is like you can have access to this kind of information from different parts of different pages. So you can actually have some kind of global user management or user state management kind of service, and you can access to these from any kind of pages. So it means that you add together those. And why I wrote that, like, hey, end of Redux saga, it's a pun. I'm not sure, but because I think, yeah, there is the Redux and there was this saga tool and everything what we used before. Do you guys like Redux? Yeah, you guys like it? Easy to use? How much you have to write? How many times you have to write? How many files you have to change when you add the new logic? 3 files? So what we found in Redux is when your application grows is kind of like, dealing with this kind of state management is kind of getting more and more complex and kind of difficult to test. But maybe, just maybe we haven't found the right pattern. But if you don't have to maintain an old application, you can actually kind of like remove the Redux from your application. Because React luckily give you the context and the providers to actually, get all those features what you need to kind of a global statement for a global state management. So as you see here, I use the same kind of coding pattern for creating a service. But if I download the data from a server using Axios or React Query, then I call it more like a store, because usually React Query give you a caching feature, so you can get access to that data or kind of deal with reloading, for example, the data more times if you hit some error endpoints. So maybe your server is not available, your network on your mobile phone is not right, so it's trying to reload it for you. So this is why I call that as a store. However, how do you build up that one is the same. And this is so it would be one file. So you can I can show you in the separated section, but it could be in one file. And it wouldn't be strange in React world. We combine together a lot of concepts in one page. We have HTML, CSS, JavaScript in one page. So why not we combine together a little bit, kind of creating a store, wherever you use a little bit different building blocks. So one of the building blocks here, of course, the first one, because we use TypeScript. Have I mentioned that? Yeah, this whole project, and my recommendation is always use TypeScript. So I don't think so it should be a question anymore in 2021. It's actually awesome. It helps you a lot. If you haven't played with TypeScript, please start learning it. You're going to need it. So that the first one is you creating an interface. The interface helps you actually what is exported from your store or your service. So it's actually everybody can see, and it's force you to kind of following the same pattern. So that's just the TypeScript part. But actually creating the context, as you see here, is a create context. So the React create context is a tool how you create it. It's nothing else. It's just an empty kind of object under the hood in a memory. So this is what it does. You have to have a kind of an undefined version of it. Why? Because React context is created, but it's not injected in the app. It's going to be injected in the application or initialized if you use a provider, as you see here in the last section. So this is how you usually do this. It means that if you haven't injected this create context in the application before with the provider and you start using it, it wouldn't work it. So this is why you need some kind of guard around it. And this is nothing else, just using the hook, use context. Means that the use context is getting your created context and returning it. The only things what you see here, the extra, is just a message for yourself or for fellow developer who actually haven't injected the provider somewhere in the application when you start using it. So this is why, and you can add all these things in one file. So just create a contact store, or a contact store in this case, a contact store, which is all these things is there. You will use in your application the use contact store as a hook. So somewhere else you import it, probably or most likely in your page. And somewhere on the higher level of the architecture, you kind of inject this context provider. So which means that you have this context store provider there, and you inject it. I'm going to show you in a place where we can put it. I call it app initializers, which could be familiar if you are an Ember or Angular app. You already built Ember or Angular before. We usually have this initializer state. And it's true in React as well. You have to initialize a lot of things when you are building your application. So this is where you usually put those kind of like context store provider. And this is where your logic goes. So use the use query. You get a lot out of the box, like all the state management. You get the data, and you just export the data out, and you can use in your pages. Simple, easy. And then actually I show you examples so you can test it. Just a little kind of a separation, what we can call it service, what we can call it store. And the service could be something like authentication, or maybe you have to add analytics to your code. So this typically like you have a kind of common logic, and maybe the configuration how your analytics works, and you export from you just create an interface in there, and you kind of like adding here. Sorry about this syntax here, but this is how React works. So they need this value thing. So this is why it's not so beauty, but this is how you export maybe track or something if it's an analytics service. So you have a method which sending a tracking request to Adobe Analytics or Google Analytics, and you can use that one. So you can have a kind of common analytics service. But for example, like you can download things like maybe a to-do list or a project list. It's up to your application. So there is the business logic of your application. And this is, I call it store. But it's just a naming convention, and this is how you separate, again, logics in your application. If you haven't, when you saw this, the first slide, there was kind of like one of the most important long kind of line here is the mocking. And why I'm saying that one, because when I see projects, so many projects actually built on, build the front end, and you have to run the back end somehow, or maybe there is an Express application or something like that. So, but there are also mocking tools, what you can run inside the browser or with your front end project. May I ask you guys, how many of you running mocking service like separately, like an Express application, or you maybe run a Ruby on Rails application? How many of you use that one next to your front-end project? Hands up. Yeah, so you guys launch more projects next to each other to be able to develop your front-end application, isn't it? And how many of you using MSW? Yeah. Or how many of you use Mirage? Ember.js devs use Mirage, isn't it? So which is a Pretender.js or Mockjax? Pretender.js, Mockjax, and maybe. So anyway, Pretender.js, Mockjax, Mirage, they are running inside the browser as a mock engine. They intercept the API call, when you are trying to download something outside from the browser, and they actually give you back the answer what you kind of like set up for you. MSW is actually supporting the Node.js, and also running in the browser using service layer. So this is why it's fantastic. You write one mocking solution, and you actually can run in your Jest, because Jest is running on your Node.js, and can run in the browser. What is amazing with this, you don't have to, you're not depend on the backend development. You're just checking the specification of what your backend developers provides for you, and you can build up the whole kind of like mocking service, mocking layer under it. So you can go ahead with your project independently from the backend. That's another thing. Your project manager may be not happy with that because they cannot test the full stack solution when you're finished. But actually, it's just good to kind of like separate the development. And so when we talk about mocking, is actually one thing I would just recommend. Go to the MSWJSIO website, which should be open here, and nothing new here. You're just actually following the tutorial or the recommendation, and you can add to your project. So they actually suggest you to create a mock folder. It's actually installing for you the service worker under the hood. And there are some examples. How do you create those mocks? What I would suggest, of course, you have this mocks folder, but inside the mocks folder, you can have a data folder, which is also cool because you can have those JSON responses, those examples, those mock data in the data folder. And you can have those handlers. So it's basically which determine, if I have this URL, somebody calling API/contacts or API/projects. This is the data what you should respond. You set up probably a simple function. It's a mock.js. It actually looks like a simple function like in Express.js. So it's quite similar. You set up that you are, it's a 200 response. And what is the data what I respond for that request? And there is a server and a browser TypeScript, which means the server used in your Jest project when you're running your test, and the browser when you are opening your application and you are developing your features. If you haven't used MSWJS before, please start using it, play with it. It's not React, it's not Angular, not Ember, it's for everybody. So that's a fantastic with this tool. You can add to any project what you have at the moment, and you never go back and never kind of start building a separate Express application separately if you start using MSW. So I highly recommend it. It's awesome. Why? Because you can actually create scenarios. And then there is Mirko, actually. He helped me in the first time to building scenarios around our application when we built previous apps. And also the testers who inspired us as well, because they wanted always, test out certain features in the application without kind of running the backend. They wanted to see if we have an error response from the server, how we actually see the error state or error problems, the error message on the screen. How do you do that? So this is why we kind of came up with this idea, hey, why not just adding a little kind of scenario or kind of query params on the top and pass the scenario there what you actually kind of need. And if you run your application on that way, you kind of get that kind of response. So, and it's just 4 lines of code. You can see in the demo app, it's the most basic implementation, just added yesterday, is just 4 lines of code, checking the query params. If that's why you're there, add to the handlers, add to the server handlers, that kind of scenarios and use it. Super easy, super quick solution. So you don't need a kind of complex logic for that. And it's boosting how do you develop your app, because you can easily kind of switch their certain state, test it out. Testers gonna love it. And also, what is fantastic in this whole thing is when you're writing your Jest application or Jest tests, you can use the same method to set up in your test, the separated states. So basically, when you are writing your test, you're using the same data, the same kind of mocking solutions easily in your Jest test. So when you have to change an API because something changed in a backend, you just change one place, and you basically all your tests gonna be updated, all the kind of user interface gonna be updated quickly, because you don't have to maintain those data layer in different places. This is why it's important the models as well. Models are nothing else in this case in React. It's just interfaces, TypeScript interfaces. So try you will see, you can see a lot, you can create a lot of models. Each of the times when you see some kind of data which exists in different places. So then you can actually kind of create those interfaces in an interface folder. And when you have to kind of change it, and it's not just the model itself, so not just the project object. It's also awesome if you are, what you respond from the server. So this is why you can see in the demo app, not just a contact model, it's a contact response. So you can actually modeling what you actually expect from the server. What was the app initializer? What I wanted to mention is actually just here, just bringing everything together in one place. So the app initializers are nothing else. Just, if you think about the standard React application, you have this, simple app, add to the root. But if you check about app, you basically see there is two things here. The app initializers, which is all the providers wrapped in, and the routes. So app initializers like having maybe some HTML or CSS set up, the router set up, initializing the query params, initializing some the store. And as you see, the routes is actually this new syntax, what you can use from React Router version 6. And you can actually you see all those kind of like pages kind of linked from here. So a page usually should be able to link to the router. And so this is why what is amazing also, you can use, if you have certain things when you need in your test, you can create a test initializers, which actually kind of like mimicking the same thing. So for example, you need the router and maybe need a query client provider to initialize your test. So you can have these initializers in sync with the app initializers, and you can import in each of your tests. Testing, probably nothing new here. You use Jest, you use TypeScript, you use a React testing library. So if you use a latest React project, it's always creating the testing library. React Hooks testing library is awesome as well to testing the services and the stores, because you are testing the hooks. This is your entry point. You can import the test initializers in your test and use the MSW mock data in your test. Again, you can see examples in the demo project. Please spend some time with it. If you need end-to-end testing, I think it's good to try out nowadays Playwright and maybe Puppeteer. I felt Cypress slow. So maybe Cypress can be useful because this is what your testers use, but I would recommend to check out Playwright, which actually supporting all the browsers and much, much faster, and you can run your test parallel. And it's from Microsoft, so it's quite nicely maintained. I wanted to talk about micro frontends a little bit, and there is the separation, and basically, yeah, that's it. But I think it's what is important in the micro frontends, what I just wanted to mention, how do you separate your application if you have more sections on your page? There is one option actually on server side. You're building your separated front-end apps like a React and Angular and Ember.js app, and in each router or each sub-route is rendering a different application. That's one of the way. So typically, like you can have a login application separately. If you logged in, you are showing the main application. That's a kind of concept there. But there is another option using an umbrella project nowadays. And this is one of the single SPA here, or the other one is Kwankun, which is actually built on single SPA, just give you a little bit out of the box, give you a little bit more features immediately. So why micro frontends? Because when your front-end application grows, it could be really complex quite quickly. And the other what I wanted to mention is like, separate your component library and package library in a separated application. You probably use, Storybook for your component library. So it could be in a separated repo. And you just import it. And also you can have a tool or package library. You can use Rollup, TypeScript, of course, in this project and import in it. If you want to practice this kind of concepts, we have a meetup group here in Wellington. So please join us. So this is, actually have the link here. So every second Thursday, we have a TypeScript, JavaScript workshop on Cuba Street. Please come over. We're actually playing these tools, and we build applications together. It's in the Inspiral Dev Academy. And actually, this Thursday, we're going to have that one. Also, there is a link in this. You can also, I think I should go back here. Also, we have a Discord channel where if you have any question, please join. And we can chat about this. And if you learn something or you want to share some good ideas, it would be fantastic. And also, you can find the kind of demo code in this meetup contacts app, what we actually improve further on our workshops every second Thursday. So, and also please check it out. The concept, what I talked about, a lot of examples here. So if you want to see how you actually kind of write a page test, you can find out, certain tests, for example, here, like what I just talked about, like how do you test it? As you see, server use, this is when you actually kind of like importing your mock and check out a certain state. Easy, like, is a 400 error? Check out this error is actually exists. So anyway, so check those source code and share your opinion, please. So this is what, how we build nowadays React application in big organizations here in Wellington. So, and I'm happy to kind of hear your opinion as well. So maybe a few questions if you have time. Thank you very much.
Pop your hand up if you have a question. We'll bring you the mic.
Thank you, Zoltan. You briefly mentioned Redux before. Do you have any opinions, if you've used it, about MobX?
Yeah, and you're right. Actually, MobX would be my option or choose if I should use all the React project. Also, actually, when I had to use Angular, I was not really convinced about ArcGIS. I felt it's super complicated. So we implemented MobX there as well. Beautiful tool. And it's actually in sync with, so you can use it in React, you can use it in Angular, and it's actually almost the same as in what you get used in Ember. But the latest MobX actually suggesting if you're using the latest React, don't use MobX anymore. So this is why I like MobX for migrating, but actually for long term, again, just use context and hooks.
Hey. Do you think React is becoming more opinionated? Like, as you said, with do not use MobX and so on and so forth?
Yeah, you're right. Actually, we see nicely. Of course, they still try to be really flexible and kind of like less opinionated. But what is, I think the React, always think about the frameworks, who is creating those frameworks. And who's creating these frameworks, they usually kind of the first thing, they try to kind of like solve their own problems. So at the moment, they mainly build a social application, social network application, where they actually improved React. Unfortunately, not all of us building a social network application. We usually build CRUD applications. So this is why check out, when you have to select a framework, check out what kind of product you want to build. So if you build something which is kind of like, the data flowing down and you never kind of like, try to reload and get back the same state on Facebook. Usually, when you see something, it's very difficult to get back. This because they don't have routing. They don't need that because you just see a data flow. But Ember and Angular built on mainly mirroring the CRUD application kind of like concepts. And similar as Vue.js as well. Vue.js is nicely have stolen a lot of good ideas from Angular and Ember and simplified it. So this is why Vue is getting more popular. But React see certain problems what we had had maybe what we solved in other frameworks, and they nicely adopted. As also other frameworks have stolen a lot of ideas from React. So this is why these technologies are merging or emerging. So they getting similar. So we get almost the same things out of the box from each of them. And yeah, and the Next.js actually is quite opinionated, kind of like a build tool based on React.
Oh, kia ora, Zoltan. That was
Thank you, guys.
great.
And yeah, thank you.
Big round of applause for Zoltan. Thank you so much. Thanks, everyone. I hope